SOLIDWORKS Enterprise PDM is obviously a data management system. That's what PDM stands for. Many of you may be familiar with the Workgroup PDM tool or other PDM tools, but the things to point out here is that the main point of having a data management tool is to have secure, revision controlled data that anyone at your company can access. And so the goal here is to make accessing that data as easy as possible without having to actually interfere with the user's experience. And Enterprise PDM does this really well by using a Windows Explorer interface. So to browse into the system, and I'm going to make sure that I log off here for a second. To browse into the system, all we have to do is browse to the C drive on our computer. And once we're on the C drive, you're going to notice that I have a bunch of regular Windows folders, but I also have these two little blueberry icons. Those blueberry icons are entrances into my vault. So when I browse into one of those blueberry icons, it's going to ask me to provide some sort of credentials. I'm going to go ahead and log into this vault as the engineer for the time being. And what you're going to see is that it will take my Windows Explorer window and split it into a top and a bottom. So now I'm in the vault. Without having to do anything weird or bring up any outside interfaces or anything that may interfere with my day-to-day work, I've been able to get into the vault, and here I can see 4 folders. Now there's more than just 4 folders in the vault, but as the engineer, the person we're logged in as, this is how our administrator has chosen to set it up. He's only given me permissions to see these 4 folders. And so we're going to do a couple things. The first is just to browse into this engineering folder. And finding information in the vault, because it is a Windows Explorer interface, is exactly the same way you would find information now if you had stuff stored on a network drive or wherever else it was. So I can browse into each of these folders, and I can find the appropriate files that I'm looking for, and they show just as they would within a normal Windows Explorer situation. What's different now, however, is that I have all this information at the bottom portion of my screen. So if I click on this top level assembly, for instance, the first thing that loads up for me is what's called a data card. This data card is actually really a big backbone to the system. So this system runs on Microsoft SQL Server, and for those of you who don't know, SQL Server is a database program that is basically exclusively out there for gathering and sorting of data such that you can search on it quickly, report on it, do all kinds of nice stuff. So that's what this data card is doing. It's collecting something we call metadata, and metadata is simply information about a file. So things like description, revision, part number, material cost, vendor, whatever it may be, all that metadata can be gathered and stored here on this data card so you can access it at a later time. Now what's really nice about these data cards is they are linked into your SOLIDWORKS files. So if you're adding custom properties to your SOLIDWORKS file, again, description, material, weight, whatever it may be, we can pull those properties directly onto this data card so that you don't have to input the information multiple times. If you're talking about non-SOLIDWORKS files, you should keep in mind that this system will work with any type of file you want to put into it, be it a text document, a Word doc, a PowerPoint, an Excel spreadsheet, a PDF, whatever you want to throw into the system, it's going to control. And for those documents that don't have properties like SOLIDWORKS does, you can still tag them with this metadata information so that you know more about the file than just the name of the file. Very, very useful interface. The other thing about these data cards is they're completely configurable. You get to choose what fields show up on here, and you can change the fields per data type. So for instance, your SOLIDWORKS files may not collect the same information as a Word document or a purchasing document or whatever else you're storing in here. Okay, so the other tab that you have is a preview tab. And again, the really nice thing about this tool is that it's all embedded inside Windows Explorer, so we can preview our SOLIDWORKS files directly within Windows Explorer Don't have to open up SOLIDWORKS, don't even need SOLIDWORKS installed on my computer. So anyone at the company can preview these files if they have access to them. Now, we can also preview multiple other types of files. So it previews over 250 different types of files, Word documents, PDFs, PowerPoints, again, the same kind of Microsoft stuff, as well as AutoCAD, Inventor, and Pro Engineer files if you use any of those or have any of those as legacy data. Okay, if we look at the third tab, this is the version tab. And the version tab is basically, let me go to one that has some more versions. The version tab is a historical reference of what has happened to your file since it's been included in the system. So every time you make a change to a file and you push that change into the system, Enterprise PDM is keeping track of that. And it keeps track of that through both versions and revisions. And so the point here is that if you shipped something 2 years ago and you want to go back to that drawing, you're going to be able to have access to any of the older versions of a file at a right mouse click, of course, if you have the permissions to do that. So you don't have to get rid of any of your old stuff. The revision control, the version control is happening automatically within the system. Now for SOLIDWORKS files in specific, we've got a Bill of Materials tab. And this Bill of Materials tab is basically just pulling the SOLIDWORKS Bill of Materials out into Enterprise PDM. So as you build an assembly in SOLIDWORKS, it's creating that BOM, and that is allowing us to show it here inside of the Enterprise PDM interface. So basically, again, what this is it's just a list of everything that's needed to build that assembly from a SOLIDWORKS standpoint. What we can do, however, is add non-SOLIDWORKS stuff to this. So in SOLIDWORKS, your bill of material is only going to be showing other SOLIDWORKS documents. In Enterprise PDM, we could add things like an instruction manual or a cleaning manual or whatever it may be that's a non-CAD file. And what's really nice about that is that once you have all that stuff added to your BOM here in Enterprise, you can push that information out through an XML format to another system. If you have an ERP system or an MRP system, we can facilitate communication with that tool through some sort of an XML interface such that you don't have this manual back and forth between the two systems. Now I've got two questions here that have come up while I've been talking that I want to stop and answer for a second. The first question is, what is the difference between version and revision? And that's a really good question. So with versions, basically every time you check a file in or out, you get a version, right? So version 1, version 2, version 3, so on and so forth. Those are for the most part your intermediaries. Revisions are, you can look at it as a special version. So when a version gets to a point where you want to release it to the rest of the company or call it approved or whatever buzzword you're going to use, you can stamp that with a revision. And what that allows us to do is actually control visibility to these things. So we could have certain people in the company who only see revisions. Our manufacturing team, for instance, they only get to see A, B, and C. Our engineering team, however, can see those intermediary versions that happen between the revisions. And that's why we segregate those two things. The other question I have is, does Enterprise PDM work with CATIA files? The answer to that is no. It does not understand the relationships between CATIA files. So it'll control a CATIA assembly and CATIA parts as single files, but it does not understand that those parts belong to that assembly. Okay, so we'll continue on here. Contains tab is just the same as the Bill of Materials tab, but instead of showing it in a table, you're showing it in a tree structure. And then you got a really cool little tab here called Where Used. And so I come and I pick on this little washer here, and we hit the Where Used tab, and it's going to show you every assembly that washer is used in. So if I have to go out and make a change to that washer, I know that it's going to potentially affect all these different assemblies because that's where it's used. So very cool little interface here, very useful information, and again, it's all inside Windows Explorer, so it's not some scary interface that you have to worry about learning. The other nice thing is all your commands are available through a right click. If you want to right click and check out, get older versions, look at the history of a file, for instance. You know, I could come to one of these released files, check out its history, and it's going to show me who did what, when they did it, all with date timestamps for these. So great for auditing capabilities as well. Okay, but again, that stuff is all, like I said, available to a right click. Now I got another really good question here. Do all users have to have a SOLIDWORKS license to access documents and other files? The answer to that is no. Enterprise PDM is licensed separately from SOLIDWORKS, so all you have to have is an enterprise license, and that will allow you to browse the vault and access the different files. Alright, so now speaking of SOLIDWORKS, what I'm going to do is go in and show you what the SOLIDWORKS interface looks like. So there's our Windows Explorer interface. And before I go into SOLIDWORKS, I'm just going to go into something like Microsoft Office for a second. So I've got Word here, just a typical non-SOLIDWORKS application. And what I don't want you guys to think is that this is only a SOLIDWORKS tool, because it's not. It's going to work with any other application that you have. If I'm in Microsoft Word and I want to go open up a file, I can just go File Open, and I can browse right into my vault. Okay, browse into the document vault and go into all these different folders. And I don't happen to have a Word document in any of these, but I want you guys to know that it can be accessed through this Windows Explorer interface just in the File Open dialog box. Again, nothing special. If I was to create a file in Word, test document for instance, I can just go File Save, and again, all I have to do is browse to my C drive, browse into that document vault, and I could go ahead and save this test document into the vault. So it's, again, exactly the same as working if you're storing on a network or if you're storing locally right now or whatever you may be doing. There's no harm in using this tool. It doesn't add any overhead. So what we're going to do now is bring up SOLIDWORKS. And SOLIDWORKS is going to have a very special interface over in the right-hand side that's going to give us access to additional file information. So if we come in here and say File Open, again, through the File Open dialog box, I'm going to be able to browse into my vault. So we'll go into our little document vault here, and I think we'll go into the first project. And I'm going to come down here and I'm going to open a drawing. Okay, so I've got this drawing. It's in the draft state. I'm going to go ahead and open that up in SOLIDWORKS. The first thing you're going to see is that it should ask me if I want to check the file out. Okay, here's my little checkout screen. I'm going to go ahead and check these things out, and what that means is that I'm taking responsibility for the files. When I check these things out, I am locking anybody else from making changes. I have ownership of this file. I'm the only one who can make changes. Everybody else can still view them. They know that they're there. They just can't make any changes on it while I have it checked out. So you see what happens is that in my SOLIDWORKS interface, it loads up some information about these files. There's a little equal sign next to each of the file names, letting me know that the version of the file I'm working on is the latest version that exists in the vault. It's equivalent. It also has my name next to these files. So if you were working on a large assembly and different portions of that assembly were being changed by different people, you would see all that information within your interface here. So you're always going to know who's working on what particular files at any point in time. You could click on each of these, and down at the bottom it'll load up some different information about them. You can see we have a little preview and state information, checked out information, so on and so forth. But basically I want to make a change to this thing. So I'm going to grab this view and I'm just going to make a simple change, pull it over to the left here, and I'm going to hit save. And when I do that, you're going to see my equals sign go away and my drawing becomes highlighted in green. That's letting me know that I've made a change to that vaulted file And if I want anybody else to see those changes, I have to check that back into the system. And so I'm going to go ahead and do that. You can select the file and hit the check-in button. And before I do this, let me just explain to you that checking in and saving are two different things. You can save as many times as you want to your local computer all day long, because when you check a file out, it brings a copy of it to your local machine. So when you're working on and when you're changing a file, you're making those changes locally, not over the network. So I can save all day long. It does not create a new version in the system until I actually check that file back in. So I'm going to go ahead and check the file back in now. It's going to create version 2, and I'm going to add a little comment, moved ISO view. Just so that you know, we can force these comments so that you have to enter it before you can continue. If you're worried about audit trails and ISO stuff, things like that, you may want to do that. So we'll check it in. You notice that my drawing has become version 2. My part didn't change versions because we didn't change anything to it. There was no reason for the system to create a new version. However, it did remove my name from the checkout column, so anybody else who had permissions would be able to come into the system and check the file out. Okay, so the other thing I want to point out here is that these things are in the workflow state of draft. So one of the really nice things about Enterprise PDM is that it has this workflow engine behind it. And what I mean by that is that it can route documents from one place to the next in an orderly fashion. So here as an engineer, I may want to submit this thing to my boss for approval. You can set it up in Enterprise so that all that happens electronically. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to change the state on this file, and I'm going to submit it for engineering approval. When I do that, it brings up a nice little screen. In this screen, I can type a note, please review my design. And then from this, I can also choose who I want to get an email notification about that. So I'm going to notify the engineering manager. And you have the option of automatically notifying people or giving users the options through checkboxes. I've put the checkbox option up here, but as soon as I hit OK on this, you'll see in my SOLIDWORKS window the state changes to pending engineering approval. And if I look at this file, I actually can't check it out anymore. So because it's pending approval, the engineer can't be making changes while it's waiting to get approved. It would either have to get kicked back to him or it would have to move forward in the process. Again, just a permission thing that I have set up in this vault. It doesn't have to be that way, but it's something that's possible. So what I'm going to do now is close SOLIDWORKS, and I'm going to log off as the engineer for a second. And so by logging off as that engineer, it's going to allow me to log in as the engineering manager. And when I do this, we should see that he has a notification. Okay, he's actually got 4 notifications because we were working on some stuff earlier. So we're going to skip to the last notification in the list here. And, oh, there it is. Just came through. It's telling us that those 2 files, the part file and the drawing file, were moved from draft to pending engineering approval by the engineer on August 4th at 1:56. So this notification has actually come through the database mail system, but if you're using Outlook or Lotus Notes, we can push it through that system as well. So let me take a second here and answer a question that we had. Can the workflow, the document routing, apply to other documents? That's a really good question, and the answer is absolutely yes. In fact, what's really cool about this tool is that you can have as many workflows as you want, and they can apply to different documents. So you can have your CAD documents go through one workflow, and your Microsoft Word documents or whatever else they may be go through a completely different workflow with completely different approvers. There is a lot of flexibility inside this tool. And if I have a chance, I'll bring up the admin tool just to show you guys what these workflows look like, because they're really cool. They're just like little flow charts. But anyway, in terms of this notification, like I said, you can get this through your normal email as well. But regardless of how you get it, you're going to have the same information. So The first is a link to the file, a direct link. So if I wanted to open the file in SOLIDWORKS, I could do that. I could view the file in a viewer, look at its properties, grab the history of the file. You know, what's happened to this drawing since it's been in the vault? Well, the admin put it in there, and then the engineer did some changes to it and submitted it for engineering approval. So far, so good. The last link right here will actually browse you to the file in the vault. So if you wanted to open up Windows Explorer and go find it, all you have to do is click on this link and it's going to browse directly to it for you. Very, very useful type of thing. And then you could use all your Windows Explorer commands inside here. We could look at the preview, we could check out the data card, we can do all this kind of stuff. Now, before I go too much further, I want to talk about two other things that the tool can do. So we've got this metadata that I talked about in the beginning, and the metadata is a very important thing inside the system. The reason being is everything that shows up on this data card, all this metadata, we're going to be able to search on that. So the searching interface inside Enterprise PDM is very robust. I'm going to bring that up for a second. So we've got this SOLIDWORKS Enterprise PDM search tool, and it's a Windows Explorer interface just like everything else. It doesn't seem to want to refresh for me there. Getting a little bit of weird Windows stuff going on. There we go. Okay, so I've got two searches over here. Complete search and this document information search. Now, you create searches basically the same way you create data cards, and you can have as many of them as you want. But basically, if I click on one of these searches, it's a little form that I'm allowed to fill out. Okay, fairly simple here. Where do you want to look in the vault? I want to look in the whole vault. And what do you want to look for? I want to look for things that have 10 in the file name. Hit search, and it's going to give me a list. You notice it brings up quite a few different documents. I've got a JPEG document, a PowerPoint file, and a bunch of SOLIDWORKS documents in here. So it's not just searching for specific documents unless you actually type in a file extension. Plus, you'll notice that none of these files actually start with 10. And that is because you've got wildcards implied in the system here. So you don't have to type a bunch of asterisks and stuff to find information that's relevant. Now once you find these files, I'll take this picture of my motorcycle for instance, you can view all their information inside the Enterprise PDM interface. So you can come through here and you can preview the files just the same way you would if you had browsed to it in Windows Explorer. You can look at the data cards, you can look at the versions, you can get the history. You can do all that different stuff right from within the searching interface. Okay, but there's a lot of different ways to search. This is just one of them. If I want to search on fields individually, that's a great way to do it. But you've also got these data cards set up, and so we can search those data cards directly. Let's take, for example, my SOLIDWORKS part card. This part card is unique in that it has a purchased versus built radio button on it. So I could come in here and I could click on purchased and hit search, and that'll show me every file in the system I have right now that's marked as being purchased, right? But this is Boolean searching as well, so you can add criteria to this. Let's say I want to look for all purchased parts that have the description of base. Type that in, hit search. I actually find nothing. There are no purchased parts that have the description of base. Well, what if I look at parts that we build in-house? Do I have any of those? Look at that, I sure do. I've got one part that's marked as built, and it has the description of base. And if we go look at the data card, we can see that right there. So it's very easy to set these searches up to cater to the kind of information that you want to look for. And then the user interface for this is actually incredibly intuitive to go through. Now I've got another question. It says, can third-party design firms access PDM Enterprise? The answer to that is yes. There's a couple of different ways that they can access that. If you have that kind of situation, I suggest you try and talk to us afterwards today or in the future. We could talk about the different methods. They can use a web access method. You can set up partial servers at their location. Really depends on what type of situation and what type of relationship you have with that third-party firm. Okay, so there's our searching interface. Very cool stuff. I want to also show you guys the reporting interface. So if you've ever heard of management dashboards or anything like that, you can create those inside Enterprise too, because it is a SQL-based tool. So what I'm going to do is open up an Internet Explorer window. And I've created a report, a management dashboard that runs inside of Internet Explorer. So if I open up Internet Explorer and I browse to my report manager, it's going to ask for my credentials, so I'll put those in. And what it's going to do is load this custom report I've created. And this report in specific is going per project, and it's showing me the status of all the files in the project. So we're going to give it a second to load up here for the first time, because that takes just a minute the first time you load it for the day. And then once I get that up, what we're going to see is that I have a little drop down for my projects. And if you remember, I'll show you this while we're waiting for it. Inside the vault, there were five, six projects. Okay, some of these things have files in them, some of them don't. Project 2, for instance, has no files in it. It's just a blank project at this point. But projects 1 and 3 have files. So let's go to our report. And here's what it looks like. Select a value. Which project do you want to look at? Project 1, for instance. Let's go ahead and view the report for that. Okay, and it's going to load up a nice little bar graph showing me my different statuses. So in this project, I've got some files in draft, some files pending .control approve, few files pending engineering approval, and some files that are released. And if I scroll down even further, I've got each of those categories here. So, hey, I'm the engineering manager. What's pending engineering approval in this project? Well, it's those 2 files that I just sent out to it. So if you didn't want to use your notifications and you wanted to use this type of a dashboard instead to filter this information, that's completely acceptable. And what's nice about this is that it updates live. So I'm going to send those files forward, and we should see this pending engineering approval column completely disappear from this report. So let's go ahead and do that. And before I do that, again, there's like 2 things I want to point out on this drawing. So let me pull that drawing up, 301-830, and we're going to look at the preview of it for a second. So right now it's got a watermark. That watermark says for reference only because it has not yet been approved. It doesn't have an A, it doesn't have a revision yet. We've also got a revision field in the title block, and then we've got a checker and approver field in the title block. None of this stuff is filled in. Normally what you would have to do is go in and fill this by hand, but when you're dealing with a system like this, we can allow some background actions to do that for us. So as the engineering manager, I'm going to send this thing off and say approved, and it should put my name in the title block. Now, I don't have SOLIDWORKS open right now or anything like that, so it's doing all of this in the background without having to open SOLIDWORKS. You're going to see I get a preview pretty much instantly. Watermark is still there, no revision yet, but the engineering manager has approved it on 8/4/2010. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. I'm going to finish off through the rest of this here so we can maybe get to some questions that you guys might have. And what I'm going to do is log off as the engineering manager, and I'm going to log in as the .control person. Okay, so by logging in as .control, you probably heard I got that little notification right there. And now .control has access to a lot more files, or a lot more folders in the vault that the other people didn't necessarily have access to. Again, we're just controlling permissions here for the different folders. I'm going to show you one thing before I go back into the engineering folder. I've got this manufacturing folder. Okay, in this manufacturing folder, I've got some parts. I've got this 301-830 PDF. That is a PDF of the drawing that we're trying to pass through for approval. I'm just going to go ahead and delete that out. Actually, I want to make sure that I can delete that. I want to prove to you guys that something pretty soon here is going to happen live. And what's happening is we're going to automatically create a new version of this PDF. So I'm going to go ahead and get that out of there and log back in as our dot control person. Okay, so dot control is going to go ahead and do the last step of this approval process. We're going to go into that engineering folder and we're going to send this file off to be released. Right, so right here, right click on the file, change state. Again, release for manufacturing or reject. These options are all based upon my workflow choices. So we'll come in here and we'll say release for manufacturing. Now, a couple of things are going to happen. Remember that on that drawing we had a watermark and no revision. Now those things are going to fill in for me. So we'll right click, change state, release for manufacturing, and we'll say approved on that. Okay, approved. Hit OK. We're going to see a revision A pop up in the column right there. So we got our nice little revision A. As well as looking at the preview of this drawing, you can see now that the watermark is removed, and we've got Rev A in the title block, and we've got dot control approve that thing on 8.4. Okay. Now what it's also doing in the background, you may have seen the little SOLIDWORKS icon pop up here, is it's actually creating a PDF automatically for me. So instead of having to go in there and manually create this PDF, it's doing it in the background without having to bug me. And so what I'll do for a second while it finishes creating that is go back to our report manager. Remember that our report manager had those files in pending engineering approval? Well, if we just come back here and we refresh that report, you can see now that those files in pending engineering approval are gone. They've actually moved into the release state, and if we went into released and looked at them, we should be able to find 301.830 is the drawing and 201.830 is the part. They were just released for us. So live updating web-based manufacturing dashboards, really easy to create, and we actually have a recorded webinar that talks about this more in particular as well. So, quick question before I continue. Somebody asked, can you add a manufacturing traveler with manufacturing operations of how the part needs to be done? That's actually a good question. If your manufacturing traveler is a document, you can absolutely add that in. Enterprise PDM has the ability to take a document and attach any other document to it as a reference. So like I said earlier, if you have an instruction manual, a cleaning manual, a manufacturing traveler, you have some G code for your CNC machines, you can attach every single one of those files to the SOLIDWORKS file, and that will create a parent-child relationship between the two, letting you know that those things travel together. So yeah, you can absolutely do that. And what I want to do now is if I jump back into that manufacturing folder, we should see that 301.830, like I just deleted, is re-added to the vault. And just to prove that I wasn't doing anything tricky here, I wanted to zoom in on this and show you guys that the title block is filled in. Okay, so we'll just scroll down there. That's going from page to page. I don't know why it's doing that, but okay, there we go. So if we look on this title block, you can see that that is indeed the one that I filled out. We've got Rev A filled in, as well as the engineering manager approval and the dot control approval. So this is the actual PDF that we just created. Now, one of the last things that I want to talk about is a different type of access. So we've been accessing everything right now through Windows Explorer. This assumes that we are all in the same company, not necessarily in the same building per se, but it assumes that we all share the common kind of internet access. We have WAN access between us, or whatever the situation may be. If, however, you're outside of the company and you need to access files, be it a vendor, be it you when you're on vacation. It doesn't really make that big of a difference. We have a web-based way to access this tool. So I'm going to close this and open up another Internet Explorer window. And this time I'm going to browse to my Enterprise PDM web interface. So if I click on this link, just browses me to my web interface. What you're going to see here is all I have access to is the manufacturing folder. So when you host out these web-based interfaces, you choose which portions of the vault people are going to be able to see. I've chosen to share only my manufacturing folder. So I'm going to log in here and pretend that I'm a vendor for a second. So if I browse into that manufacturing folder, it wants a login from me. I'll give it my vendor login. Oh, invalid password maybe. Okay, there we go. We're logging in as the vendor. And what that will allow me to do is see all of the files that exist in that manufacturing folder based on my vendor's permissions, obviously. Now, you lose a little bit from the normal the Windows Explorer interface. You don't have the tabs or anything like that, but I could still view the data cards. We could right-click in here, Properties. That will allow us to bring up the data card so your vendors can see the data cards. We don't have the built-in previews. However, if they have Adobe on their computer, they can still right-click open the file, and they can open a read-only version of this file and preview that the normal way that they would preview it. Okay. You can also, if you want, give people permission to check files in and check files out. So in the case of a vendor, that may not make sense, but if you use this, maybe you have customers come in here to look at files and make changes, or you have people making changes while they're on vacation or on the road. You can absolutely check a file out, make changes, and check back in through this web interface if you want to. Okay, so we've got a couple questions here that we want to answer. The first is each vendor has a certain access. Vendors cannot see. Oh, yeah. So here's the question: if you're using this web-based interface, can you segment vendors so that they do not see each other's information? Absolutely, yes. You can do that. It's not hard at all. It's just the permissions inside the systems. Okay, we have another question on approval signatures. For traceability, is the signature block filled in with an e-signature? Yeah, it absolutely is. In fact, that's what we did. That's what we did with this PDF. Is we had that SOLIDWORKS title block actually fill in with the people's names and dates. That is 100% verified by people like the FDA and ISO as an acceptable e-signature. Another question is, can people load files through the web-based interface? Again, the answer to that is yes, if you allow them to have the permissions to do that. So based on their login, they could or they couldn't. It really just depends. Okay, so one last thing I wanted to show you guys. I'm just going to jump into the admin tool a little bit here so you can see what these workflows look like. I've been talking a lot about them as we moved through this. Wrong vault. I want to get into this document vault. Okay, so here's my workflow. Like I said earlier, it's really just a flow chart. So you come in, you figure out what your process is going to be, and then you set that process up inside this flowchart like tool. So this is how we figure out how it goes from one step to the other. This is where actions can happen, like automatically creating PDFs or things like that. This is where a lot of that is all set up. And the nice thing here about the admin portion of things is that you don't have to be a custom programmer or a C++ whiz to do this kind of stuff. It is all incredibly visual drag and drop. So if I wanted to add a state in here, right, I could just come in, say that I want to add a state into my workflow, maybe call that obsolete. Once I have an obsolete state, I could say, you know what, my engineering people, my managers and my admin can see obsolete files, but as for everybody else, they don't even know they exist. Then all I have to do is say, how does it get from one place to the other? I could say it goes from release to obsolete. We could maybe call that end of life. And then again, we choose who does this. Well, this time it's just the management and the admin. They're allowed to obsolete files, but nobody else. That's how easy it is to modify these workflows and pretty much everything else inside this vault. So it's not like you're going to need a full-time admin to run this kind of system. It's very, very user-friendly. And so I think that covers pretty much everything I wanted to show you today.